Everyone, we got some requests to do a tutorial on the cross stitch binding I did on the last journal. So these are the signatures we're going to do and we're going to work on that binding with. But first thing to know about cross stitch is that you need to plan ahead. So just because I think it's going to be a little bit easier for everyone to understand how this is working if we do it without the signatures first. This is just a board. I have 5 signatures, so I have 5 columns, and each one has these 6 holes. And let's dive into it. So, first thing that I'm going to do is go out the first hole. And go out the top. So this is my test rig and I have way too much thread because of it, but last thing you want to do when you're trying to figure out how you're going to do this stitch is to really get into and to run out of thread halfway through. So I'm deliberately working with an excessive amount of thread. So I have my first stitch going up, and I go to the other side, and I'm going to go down and to the left. So I come in this way, then I'm going to repeat that, going all the way across. And the way this is going to work, and the reason that we have to kind of plan this out in advance, is all of your straight stitches are going to be on one side, and these are the stitches that are going to hold your signatures in, and all of your cross stitches, all the diagonals, are going to be on the other side. Now that I'm at the end, I've actually planned this out a little bit already, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in the hole on the bottom. And come out the next one over just like that. Okay, so now I'm going to jump all the way down here. Go to the top there. And we're going to repeat this going across. So you can see it kind of taking form on the underside there. So now I'm going to work across the bottom. So a lot of this is just kind of making it up as you go, but making sure you have kind of a plan for how you're going to do it. And what I am planning on is that, as you can see, I'm kind of working my way, zigzagging back and forth. Although now we're going to do something a little bit weird, because we're going to jump over here. So, learning experience. What I was wanting to do is travel to this hole. So I went in the wrong one. I should have gone in the bottom. So that's what I'll do now. I'm going to jump to the other side and I'm going to start working these other stitches. So I know that my next one needs to be on top right here. And bottom here. Top here. And bottom here. Now I want to finish off the top rung up here. The way I'm going to do that is go top, and so really right now I'm just stitching right across the top. So, you can see from my pattern, I've got this bottom one. Next one I need to go to in this column is right up here. So what you can see is we have our cross stitches all on the one side, and on the other side you can see we have our vertical stitches going all the way across. Now, kind of wanted to plan this out ahead of time just because you'll see it gets a lot more complicated when you're trying to do the signatures at the same time. And really the goal is that in between each of these holes we want to loop, because those loops are what's actually going to hold the pages in. So you really want to try to avoid having gaps in the stitches, just because that'll just make your pages that much looser. So now that we have kind of a plan, and hopefully you see the basics of how that works, we'll try to do it in the real signatures. All right, so step 2 to this is we're actually going to go ahead and stitch it in. I already have 5 signatures, holes punched for it, and my book cover already made with the holes punched, so it's the same pattern as our test piece. So we're going to start from this side, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my back signature, and we're just going to thread through here. Like I said last time, I'm using really way too much thread. This works pretty much the same way as a saddle stitch, so you could absolutely use less thread and just tie it off and continue with your cross stitch. I just don't want to. So top hole, and then we're going to come out right here. Sorry. Okay. So that's signature 1. And we're going to do the same thing with the next signature. What you'll notice is until we go back and start looping through this last one again, it's gonna be pretty loose. It'll be floppy. These other signatures, or the subsequent signatures, will be able to tighten quite a bit, but that first one is gonna be loose for a while. You might notice also that all of the holes that I've punched are a little bit oversized. All of them are a bit bigger than what I normally do. Reason for that is just, you figure with the cross stitch, each hole is going to be threaded through at least twice and sometimes 4 times. So it makes sense just to have a little extra room in there. I don't know that that's actually necessary, but I think it makes things easier. each signature, we're wanting to pull out as much slack as we can. Now, remember on this last one, we're going to go in and instead of going up, we're going to go down. You can see looking in the back that everything's pulled tight. We're getting those crosses. These first two are going to be a little bit loose, but that's just because we don't really have anything holding it tight here until I tie it off later. The downside of using the oversized holes on all of these, it makes it a lot easier to thread, but it means that that last knot isn't quite bulky enough to be able to pull it through and just pull tight against the knot. So we're just going to leave that last signature a little bit loose until we go back and pull off. So from here, I'm going up and right back in. And we're going to drop down one. The center of my next signature, just so I move through a little bit more. Downside of using too much thread, it's a lot easier to, you don't have to worry about you don't have to worry as much about tying off the thread or not having enough, but it is a bit of a pain. So same thing, we're in the bottom hole, we're coming out, just like that. And we're going to go through the next. So I actually missed that signature, so let me try to find it. So like I said, these last two signatures, or the first two signatures I did, are a little bit looser, and because of that, the holes aren't going to line up nearly as well, at least not initially. Not until I get everything pulled tight. So we're going to come up. After this stitch, it'll be a lot less floppy. pull these two tight in just a sec, but let's find this one. So those are pulling tight. And part of the reason I wanted to do that right now is since we are pretty much back at the beginning, or we're at least meeting this stitch, I'm going to go ahead and tie a knot here, just so that we can try to make sure that everything stays there and stays tight and we don't have to worry about things flopping around quite as much. So since I am tying the knot, just make sure that everything is nice and tight. And okay. And now that that's done, we're going to continue on our way by passing back into the signature. Does take just a little bit to try to get that lined up and thread the needle right after you've tied that tight. I don't normally use embroidery thread, but I just really like the color, so I pre-wax this, but it only does so much. So, if you remember from when we did our template, when we got to this point here, we jumped down to the bottom over here. So that's what we're going to do now, is just like that. And then we're going to pass it up into the next signature. There we go. So the nice thing is, as we start moving down, once we start to get these bottom holes kind of pinned down, then all the others in between should line up and get quite a bit easier to find. We're going to go here. So if you need to work the signature around in order to find the hole, go ahead and try. A little bit of not working, so there we go. see we're pulling that tight as we go. Now, next hole down. So there are two difficult parts when you're doing this. One is planning everything out to make sure that you get the cross that you want or the pattern on the back, because really once you start getting into this, you can plan and do whatever sort of crosses you'd like. But the other part is just for that first little bit that the holes are floppy, just trying to get everything lined up and passed through. It gets a lot easier once you get the edges pinned up. Okay. So now we have that through. If you remember from our test template, we went down here and we did our initial crosses going up. Or actually, I believe we went here and did our crosses going down. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so we have that first cross. Now we're going to come up, continue over the rest of that line. So I am using a sharp so that I could push through if I need to, and even using the oversized holes, sometimes that's required. I try to avoid it whenever possible, just because anytime you push through with the needle, you're going to have a little bit more blowout than you did with the pre-prepared holes in the awl. Now looking here, I'm going to go back and I'm going to pull each of these stitches just because I noticed there was a little extra slack there. Okay. Now we're on the inside here, and I want to come over to this side just like we did before, and it looks like I want to go to the bottom hole here and do this first cross stitch. Good news is when you start getting into these holes that have been threaded multiple times, you should just be able to follow it straight through. Okay. So now I'm going to go from here, I'm going to go to the top hole here and get that second cross stitch. Same thing, we're going to go to the bottom hole and get the next cross stitch, the next cross. Alright, so we're still working on getting that next cross. We're going to right here. So now we're going to go this hole, and yeah, this hole, cross over here. So with that done, we're going to jump over to this top hole and come over here. Okay. Now, bottom hole and come over. Okay. Top hole so that we can grab that stitch. We're going to the bottom hole over here. So now we're going to go in here, then we're going to file back and get these crosses. See how that's coming together. Where each time we're just going in the bottom hole, out the top. There we go. Okay, so now that these crosses done, what we want to look at is we have to go to this top hole here so we can start doing these crosses. over here. And you can see how, especially in these center holes, it starts to get pretty packed. That's where the oversized holes really pay off. We're just going to continue this all the way across. Now, go back in our last hole. There's our cross stitch. So, a couple things that I am going to do. First off, we need to tie this end off. The way I'm going to do that is by circling around these two stitches. Do that twice just to get a good double knot there. And if I can manage it, I'm going to pass the tail to the back side just because I feel like it. Pretty tight now, so I might not be able to do that. Alright, so I don't want to damage what I've done, so we're going to leave the tail out front. Maybe I do something with it. There we go. Around there. That one will be there. Okay, so you can see we have that cross stitch on the back. Everything's nicely lined up. Then if we go signature to signature, each of the signatures have continuous string from the top to the bottom, which is what I wanted to be sure of, just to make sure that I have it nice and secure in there. Alrighty, so there you go. This is very, very basic. A lot of the same work as just trying to do a saddle stitch. It just takes a little extra planning and some kind of hassle dealing with floppy pages at the beginning. but I really like the way it turned out. Anyway, thank you. Hope that helps. See y'all later.